I wrote the Little Seagull Handbook because I saw a need for a small, simple handbook that students would find easy to use, one that they would use because they could find what they needed without wading through a lot of detail that can get in the way. I also wanted to create a handbook that would help with the kinds of writing they're often asked to do or just expected to know how to do. Other handbooks didn't provide that. So my co-author, Fran Weinberg, and I set out to create a handbook that gives students what they need in a form that would be easy to use. A big part of making it easy is keeping it simple. The Little Seagull is made up of 3 sections: write, research, and edit, the main things writing students do. I'll say more about each section in a minute, but I think it's important to point out that if you want your students to use this or any handbook, you need to spend some class time teaching them how to use it. I make time at the beginning of the term to show my students what's in the book and how they can find what's in it, like this. First, I show them the brief menu in the inside front cover. If they're looking for a specific chapter, this menu makes it easy to find. And here on the front flap, they can also find an index of writing assignments they may need help with, so if they need advice on writing, say, a text analysis or an annotated bibliography, they can quickly find where to go. Note that write is in red, research is in blue, and edit is in yellow. Each section is color-coded, so you always know where in the book to go to, and once you're there, you know where you are. Next, I show them the detailed menu, which is on the inside back cover. This lets students drill down inside each chapter to find the specific section they need. Be sure to show students the Glossary Index and to tell them this is often the quickest way to find what they're looking for. Many students don't even realize that books of this kind include a glossary, where they'll find definitions of words they don't understand. I like to tell my students that they can go to the Glossary Index to find out both where to find something in the book and what it means. In fact, throughout the book, terms that are defined in the Glossary Index are highlighted in tan, so students know they can find definitions for them if they need to. Here's an example of a glossary entry. If you look up genre, you immediately see the term and the pages where it may be found, 3 and 4 in this case. But you also get a detailed definition and a list of examples. For some students, this may be all they need, but if not, they'll know where to go to find out more. The back flap has a checklist that provides basic questions to help students consider what they need to do when they're revising and editing. And students should also know about the documentation directories at the back of the book, which will lead them to just exactly the information they need for citing sources in MLA, APA, Chicago, and CSE styles. Okay, those are some of the ways to find what you need in the Little Seagull. And just so you know, there's a 2-page chapter on how to use this book on page Roman numeral 7. Now let's look at each part of the book, starting with write. This part includes a chapter on writing contexts, which provides an overview of the rhetorical situation, a chapter on writing processes, a chapter on developing paragraphs, and a chapter that provides guidance on designing documents. Because students often struggle with the demands of college-level reading, there's also a chapter on reading strategies. It also includes brief chapters on 7 genres of writing that are commonly assigned in college. Each of these chapters describes the key features of the genre and provides tips to help students come up with a topic, generate ideas, draft a thesis, and organize their writing, with diagrams to help visual learners. There's also a complete example of each genre on the Little Seagull's companion website, like this student essay that illustrates arguments. If you're using the Little Seagull as your primary text, you may want to assign some of these chapters. However, if you're using the handbook along with a rhetoric, you may want to advise students to use these chapters for reference, both during your class and later. Now let's look at the research part and how it works. This section is made up of 4 chapters on doing research and working with sources and detailed information on citing sources. You can use this section with your students in several ways, so let's look at it in some detail. Students can dip into these chapters as they need to, or you can assign them sequentially to guide students through the process of writing a research paper. In doing research, students are given help with everything from considering their project's rhetorical context through drafting a thesis and finding sources. The next chapter presents questions to help students evaluate the sources they find. These questions help students understand that sources need to be scrutinized and analyzed, that they present someone's version of the truth, not truth with a capital T. I especially like the chapter on synthesizing ideas. I want my students to see connections between the ideas presented in their sources, concepts discussed in their classes, and their own thoughts, to synthesize ideas, and in doing so, to discover interesting new ideas. Now, I'll be the first to admit that creativity probably can't be taught in a textbook, but I do think that we can tell students something about how creative people think and how they see connections and patterns that others haven't seen. I know the pieces of my own writing that I've been most excited about have explored new and sometimes unlikely connections and patterns. It's fun to see that X and Y have something in common that I didn't see before. I want to help students experience that same excitement. When students are working with sources, they need to integrate anything they cite properly into their work. So the next chapter offers advice on how to do that. Using sources is one thing, documenting them is another. Students find documenting sources to be a challenge, probably because it calls for a high level of exactness that they aren't used to. And once they learn one style, it's likely that they'll have to learn others as they move from course to course and discipline to discipline. To help them as they do that, the Little Seagull covers 4 documentation styles: MLA, APA, Chicago, and CSE. And the text helps students see the features common to all 4 by color-coding the examples. It's also useful to show students what academic and scholarly sources look like and where to find the bibliographic information they need. Each of the 4 documentation chapters provides documentation maps that do just that. Here's an example of an article in a journal and how it is documented in MLA. Note how the annotations are color-coded to match the citation at the bottom. It's also good for students to see how they should format their papers in the style they are being required to use. Each documentation chapter ends with an excerpt from a research paper. Each paper is available on the Little Seagull website, so you can ask your students to read a complete paper in the format they're being asked to use. You may also want to take advantage of the Mla Quiz on the Little Seagull website. I ask students to work in groups to fill out the citations and then check their work against the answers. Now let's look at Edit. This part of the book is divided into 3 sections: sentences, language, and punctuation mechanics. These are intuitive categories that students recognize, making it easy for them to know where to look for what they need. They also make it easy for us to find what we need. For example, when I'm responding to student drafts, I keep the detailed menu inside the back cover at hand, so I can tell students to refer, say, to S2 to fix a sentence fragment, or L4 to work on omitting unnecessary words. However, if many or most of the students in a class are having trouble with a particular grammar or punctuation issue, I'll use the appropriate handbook section as a jumping-off point for a brief lesson. On page 233, for example, you'll find advice on dealing with sentence fragments. The chapter on identifying and editing fragments might form the core of a brief lesson or homework assignment, maybe along with the preceding chapter on complete sentences. Notice also that some of the examples are shown with editing so that students can see how to edit common errors at a glance. I might walk through a couple of these edited examples with the class and then have them complete an exercise on the Little Seagull website. For instance, let's take a quick look at the sentence fragments exercise in the Sentences and Paragraphs section. As I scroll over the text, sentences are underlined. When I click on an underlined sentence, options for revising it appear. In this case, it looks like the sentence is a fragment, and it can be fixed either by turning it into a sentence, option A, or combining it with the previous sentence, option B. When I click on option C, I find out I'm correct. Both options A and B fix the fragment. Note that the exercise is linked to the online version of the handbook. If students get an answer wrong, they are given a link to the exact place in the text where they can learn to do it right. The last thing I want to show you is the Little Seagull app, which works on both computers and smartphones. Once students buy an access code, they can simply log onto the handbook website. One good thing? Students who have the little seagull on their phones will always have them in class. Here's an example of how the app works. Students can click on Edit and get the menu for the entire chapter. From there, a click takes them to the part they want. At the top of the screen are navigation buttons, either to go back to the menu or forward to the next part of the chapter, in this case, identifying fragments. Or they can click on Home to go back to the main menu. I think this is pretty cool. So, that's the Little Seagull Handbook. I want to thank you again for adopting it and for allowing me to go on about it on a screen instead of being with you in person. I hope that it will serve you and your students well.